And we're live.
Hello, and welcome to the Coronado Island Film Festival. For those of you here in Coronado, for those of you who are visiting us remotely, we're happy to have you with us. And best wishes especially to all of our former service members on this Veterans Day, and to veterans of our allies on Remembrance Day. You might notice that I'm wearing my poppy today. And our city is displaying flags on Orange Avenue, which we do for all holidays. And can you show us that picture, Alexis? I want to let you know how patriotic we are and how proud we are of all of our residents and all of our visitors who have served the nation. So thanks to our Rotary Club for putting up those flags. I'm Mike Wywoody. I'm a Navy vet, and I'm honored to host this panel with the creators of 3 films from our Salute to Veterans track. Our filmmakers include Sean Kelly, director and producer of My Father's Brothers, Paul Steinbrunner, producer and editor of Stand Down, and Charles Pink, executive producer of Operation Overlord, OSS, and the Battle for France. These films are so different from each other. From interviews with Army vets about a particular battle in Vietnam in 1966, to today's reality of homelessness among veterans, to the story of invisible warriors who changed the outcome of the war. Yet all are about extraordinary people and their journey. Let's start with Sean. Sean, tell us what My Father's Brothers is about, and how did it come to pass that you decided to make this movie?
Sure. Well, the film follows a group of survivors of a very horrific battle in Vietnam in 1966. It kind of follows them about what they went through that day and really what they continue to go through today because of it. I'm personally invested in the film because the company commander in this film is my father. And it kind of started out as really me asking more questions. He will talk about his time in the service, especially in Vietnam, but not just outright. So you have to dig a little bit. And I just thought it'd be a great thing to do, is maybe to make, the idea was really going to be a home movie, and just to share with friends and family. But as we got to talk more about it, and then he invited me down to 173rd Airborne Reunion, it started growing, and I realized, no, this is actually this is a fantastic story, and I think it needs to be shared.
And you have had lots of movie making experience, is that right, Sean?
Yeah, actually, this is my first film. My day job, I'm an executive creative director for an advertising firm, which actually has benefited me because I've got some filmmaker friends that I work with TV commercials and videos and things like that. And they really helped me out making this film. But yeah, I plunged right into this, and I don't think I really knew what I was getting into. It was a lot harder than I thought, but so very worth it.
When you started developing the story behind the film, was there a particular overarching message that you had in mind that you wanted to convey to the viewers?
It really, when I first started this, it was really based on just the idea of this terrible day that these guys went through and how they got through it, and the heroic efforts of this company to help this platoon that was surrounded. So that was really going to be the key focus. However, when I started interviewing the veterans, I realized there was a lot more to the story and how they've really come together over the years and support each other. So it really became more of something to honor not only their story, but as a way of, I guess the best way I can describe it is, I think that all veterans have a story, and I felt like it was my obligation to help them tell theirs.
There were 2 things that caught my eye, Sean, as I watched this. That is connecting the beginning and the end. One was the No Man Left Behind message, which your father instilled in Fritz, or he instilled in your father, one way or the other.
Yeah.
And then the Charlie Morris story, where he ultimately is awarded the Medal of Honor for basically the No Man Left Behind message.
That's right.
Yeah, so that continuity, that stringing that story together, I think was really brilliantly done. Did you have in mind that you would be able to keep a story like that so tightly integrated?
I honestly, at first, I didn't really even think about that. As we were developing it, this theme kept coming through, and I realized that this could be a nice thread. And then we were able to, and with a lot of the interviews and the editing, we were able to kind of a beginning, middle, and end kind of tie that together. So I really appreciate you mentioning that, because I love that aspect of it. So thank you for noticing.
And the other continuity I noticed was your mother's reaction when your dad decided he wanted to go to Vietnam, and your mother's reaction about reading about his battle in the newspaper.
Yeah.
What a brilliant woman she must be.
You know, it was, I'd seen another documentary film that interviewed, it was all about soldiers, but they interviewed one of the commanders, a wife of one of the commanders. And I thought, you know what, this would be a fantastic to get my mom's perspective of it, because, I was a little kid and my brother's a little kid, a little bit older than me. And, it wasn't in the days of email or video conferencing or anything like that. So when they got communication, sometimes it was weeks and weeks or maybe even a month later. And I can only imagine what she went through. So I figured not only this is my father's story and it's the men in his company's story, but it was also my mom's story as well.
I want to come back to you with a few more questions, but let's get on to the next one. Paul, would you tell us about Stand Down? What's the story about in the film, and why did you feel compelled to tell it?
Well, it's a story that everybody in San Diego knows, but a lot of other people really don't know too much about it. And I found that out when I said stand down, and it's like once you've been there, it kind of inside of you, and people go, what's that? It's like, you know what? That was really good, because it's like, that's why I'm making this movie, because it's really sharing a feeling. There's just this infectious is the wrong word right now, but there's a tenderness that is just all over that sacred space. A couple of baseball fields. What more ordinary place, but what an extraordinary feeling. And it's kind of like the balance of life or death or a wedding. Stuff just goes on, and there's so much healing. For me, that was just so compelling. And so I'd never been to one of these. I heard about it, I went, and then I ran into a group of people who had been again and again, starting as participants and then ending up as volunteers. And so I was able to get inside, and it's just an amazing circumstance. And everybody should know about that.
You have, from a movie making standpoint, you've been involved in other pictures. And what's peculiar about doing a film like this one, which is documenting a weekend event?
Well, it all happens at once. So it is kind of an event, but I brought my tool set, and I made over 50 films on neuropharmacology and brain chemistry and trauma. But it wasn't about the information, it was about the transformation. So it was a different thing. And in this, it was more like in this moment, where all the other films I made, writing, narration, all this stuff, they're going to tell their own story. They're going to tell me. I know nothing. I'm just taking it in and trying to arrange it for the best presentation.
So we see the activities of the weekend and the intensity of the services that are offered. And of course, this is San Diego specific. And I have in fact visited Stand Down in the past. But you indicate that the target audience is outside of San Diego. So who are you targeting this film before, Paul?
Well, it's really about transformational healing. And of course, everybody knows the kind of healing that we have. And I've gone on to make some other films, and doggone if I don't just keep running into vets who are just doing the right thing. You know, I made another film with Northwest coastal natives. My main guy, he was a Navy medic with 3 Purple Hearts. We got along really well. I made another film in New Mexico. He was in the Army, traumatized. We got along really well. People who have this kind of life and death event, they are transformed, and then they transform others. So what looks really dark and terrible turns into a very bright light.
So you had visited it before, so you had some clue as to the scope of the story you were going to tell?
No, I was there completely. What is this all about? That was like in 2017. I had no idea. I just hung out at the chaplain's tent and trying to absorb some of this stuff. And then I met Kevin McNamara, who runs the sound. He's pretty well known. And he started to introduce me to the different tents and the different people. And it just went from there. And he had already shot some footage. And then I came back 2 more times. So it was, for me, it was 3 years. For some of these people, like Dr. John and Jack Lyon, it's a lifetime. Oh, and Marilyn Cornell. They're just such amazing people.
Well, it'll be exciting to see how this resonates throughout the country and whether it can spark additional activities like that. Let's go on to Charles, Operation Overlord, OSS, and the Battle for France, which seems like a pretty descriptive title, but what you describe in the movie is not familiar to most people. So what's the storyline?
Well, the film tells the story of Allied special forces whose daring exploits changed the course of World War II. Americans and people all over the world are familiar with D-Day and how critical it was to our victory in World War II. But as you mentioned, not many people are aware of the planning and the intelligence gathering that went into D-Day before it happened, and the risks that people took, and how critical it was to the invasion's success. Since I'll give you one example that we mentioned in the film. John Ford, the famed Hollywood film director, served as commander of the OSS Field Photographic Branch, and he recruited some of the greatest talent from Hollywood to serve in it, like Harold Rawson, who was the cinematographer for Singing in the Rain and The Wizard of Oz, screenwriter Garson Kanin, Bud Schulberg. I mean, just some of Hollywood's greatest luminaries served in the Field Photographic Branch. So before the invasion, they photographed the entire coast of Western Europe from low-flying airplanes. And General Eisenhower said that if the OSS did nothing else, that alone justified its creation. So we're really trying to open up people's minds and to what went into planning of D-Day. Like Sean said he had a personal connection to the story. So do I. My dad served in the OSS in China behind enemy lines. And so that's my connection to the story. I happened to had the honor of attending the 75th anniversary of D-Day last year, which really affected me. And when I came back to Washington, every year, the Donovan Award dinner, the OSS Society of which I'm president, which was founded in 1947 by General William Wild Bill Donovan, the OSS commander, hosts a big awards dinner in Washington, sort of a preeminent gathering of the intelligence and special operations communities. Last year, we gave it to General Mattis. And so for that dinner, we produced 2 films, Operation Overlord, OSS, and the Battle for France, and Call Sign Chaos, General Jim Mattis, and the U.S. Marine Corps. And we're honored to have both films in the Coronado Island Film Festival this year. I really should give credit to Carl Colby, who wrote and directed both these films for us. I'm just the producer. But you may be familiar with his father, William Colby, who went on to serve as director of CIA. But he jumped into France as a member of the Jedburghs, which were the legendary predecessors to Special Forces. So he had a very personal connection to this story too.
Yeah, I noticed his name in the credits, and then I noticed the Colby collection as a source of many of your photographs. So
yes. Yeah.
All of a sudden, the light came on.
There are many things I love about the film. A lot of the archival footage we found and those photographs that we have an incredible researcher who works with us who just dug out some great footage. And as Carl said to me the other day, watching it, he goes, "It's almost like you're there the whole time, you know, through the use of narration in the footage.
So you've told us about the family connection, and perhaps it has something to do with the timing of the film. Is that why now?
Well, as I mentioned, last year was the 75th anniversary of D-Day, so we wanted to do something to commemorate it and the OSS's involvement. I mean, you said, I'll tell you another important thing about this film. You mentioned the poppy you're wearing. We also wanted to highlight the important role that the Allied countries played in the invasion.
So your description of the Jedburgh teams really seems to be a key to the story, and so many of the identification of individuals who participated are associated with individual Jedburgh teams. Can you describe some more about that? Because I think that's really a concept that certainly was a surprise to me.
The Jedburghs?
Yes.
Yeah, these were three-man teams, multinational teams, made up of French, British, and American soldiers, trained as commandos, who parachuted in immediately after D-Day to work with the French resistance. And they played a critical role in the invasion's success. I mean, in the film we mentioned, in one particular instance, they delayed the 2nd Panzer Division, the Das Reich Panzer Division, from reinforcing Normandy for 2 weeks, through their actions. And, the Normandy invasion, could have gone either way. There was no guarantee it was going to succeed. So the Jedburgh teams who parachuted in and we had been supplying, we and the British had been supplying the French resistance for a long time before the invasion. They were waiting for the invasion to really start their sabotage operations and to disrupt the Nazis. So as soon as the invasion occurred, the Jedburghs jumped in and organized, trained, and led tens of thousands of members of the French resistance. We also highlight the critical role of the French resistance in the invasion and the Free French forces, particularly a little-known operation called Operation Sussex, in which members of the Free French forces parachuted in to Nazi-occupied France before D-Day to gather intelligence. And General Donovan, there's a wonderful quote in the film from General Donovan who said that essentially it was like, with the Sussex teams, it was like going down a well-lit tunnel, and without them, it was completely dark. That's how important they were.
Has that concept of free participants from different countries, which proved so critical in this particular operation, been used elsewhere? Was that?
Oh yes, it was used extensively throughout the Cold War, and even today there are modern day Jedburghs. U.S. Special Forces has created modern day Jedburgh teams to honor its OSS origin. So yes, that formula continues to work. I mean, the U.S. Special Forces that we think of today, the Green Berets, they trace their beginnings to the Jedburghs, and then there was another element of the OSS called the operational groups. These were small groups of men who parachuted and operated far behind enemy lines by themselves, working with local resistance groups. Mike, the other thing I wanted to mention is why we're so honored to be part of the Coronado Island Film Festival is because you mentioned that Coronado is such a strong military town, and the Navy SEALs are in Coronado, and the Navy SEALs trace their origins to another component of the OSS Maritime Unit. So when you look at the OSS, it touches everything in terms of our intelligence and special operations communities, and continues to influence it.
And is there an additional Coronado connection, Charles?
Well, one of the folks mentioned in our film is Ambassador Charles Hostler. You're probably familiar with the Hostler Institute at San Diego State University. Ambassador Hostler went ashore on D-Day. He was part of a component of OSS called the Counterintelligence Branch, also known as X2. And what they did was they basically turned a Nazi intelligence network against the Germans and sent misinformation back that convinced them that D-Day wasn't the real invasion, that another invasion was going to soon happen elsewhere. So yes, Ambassador Hostler was a Coronado resident, and his wife, Mrs. Cheney Hostler, still lives in Coronado. Yeah, so there's some great connections there.
Wow.
The other person I wanted to mention, because we are at a film festival, one of the greatest figures in the OSS, and he's mentioned in our Marine Corps film, is Sterling Hayden, the great actor who starred in The Godfather and Dr. Strangelove. He served as a Marine in the OSS Maritime Unit and received a Silver Star. So there are all these wonderful connections between Hollywood and the OSS.
History. Was it not, was all of this information available shortly after the war? Or is this
No.
Is recently declassified information?
Yeah, in the last, yes, a lot of, OSS was only around for about 3.5 years. from 42 to 45. Yes, and many of its records remain secret for decades after the war. Much of it started being declassified in the 1980s. But, it's amazing to me, even to this day, how much is still being written about OSS and learned about it. I mean, it's really an incredible history. It's amazing what they were able to accomplish in such a short period of time. And that really goes back to General Donovan, who founded the OSS. He was a Medal of Honor recipient from World War I, the only American to receive our nation's 4 highest medals. He's the founding father of the intelligence and special operations communities. President Roosevelt called him his secret legs. General Eisenhower said he was the last hero. Just an incredible, incredible human being. And really, he was the spirit of the OSS. They said that an ideal OSS candidate was a Harvard PhD who could handle himself in a bar fight. That was Donovan. He was really that kind of guy. And so his spirit really infused the organization in so many ways and what it did and what it accomplished. Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear all this history and all of these people who were involved in direct combat missions, and then to look back to you, Sean, at the very detailed descriptions that you have in your movie about what went on in that battle, what that platoon went through, and really some pretty gory descriptions, by firsthand descriptions of what happened to the survivors and what they saw of their teammates. Did you have trouble getting them to talk about that, or was that already pretty well something that they were anxious to talk about?
Well, and as you know, some veterans will talk about their experiences, others will not. I was fortunate enough that for these guys to talk to me, and it was interesting because I'd interviewed my dad about 3 different times. I talked to him a lot, but literally on the camera interviewed him 3 different times before going down to this 173rd Airborne reunion in Fort Benning. But I had met the other 7 veterans that are in the film the night before I interviewed them. So that was a little, that was a little tough for me. I was a little intimidated, but I actually, I don't know, maybe I'm a good listener, but I really think that I think they opened up to me because I was Jack Kelly's son, and they had respect for him as a commander. But I will say, at the time, being in that room, just with me, the camera, and them, that was pretty intense, because I'd heard my dad's side of the story, and everything gels, but they went into a lot of details that I don't think I was prepared for. I was actually listening to them, trying to engage in what they were saying. I was trying not to cry, because I just couldn't imagine. I mean, they went into a lot of details that were pretty intense. And in portraying that in the film, I used a lot of photographs and some footage, and God bless the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. What a great treasure that is. That really helped me fill in the story. But I didn't want it to be wall-to-wall B-roll. And of course, in 1966, there weren't a lot of combat cameramen in the jungles of that time. So there was a balance of images to show. But really, when you saw these guys tell the story, I mean, they're in their mid to late 70s. My dad's in his early 80s. It was almost like the lines in their face got darker. It was just super intense. So I definitely wanted to convey what they were going through and what they felt as they were describing it, instead of just showing action scenes. I just felt like we also needed to see them speak to it.
At the same time, the use of the B-roll was extremely effective. And my wife watched this with me, and she commented on how it seemed like the images you showed were directly related to the comments that each of them was making at the time. That must have taken a remarkable amount of time on your part to get that to come together.
Well, it's funny, growing up in a military family, it almost ruined watching war movies with my dad, because he would say things like, "What's that American soldier doing with an Israeli assault rifle?" Or, "That insignia is supposed to be on that collar." I'm like, "Dad, come on." But what that did instill into me years later was that, okay, if I'm going to go to National Archives to help get B-roll to share in this film, it has to be right. I can't have a big red one patch on somebody, in the jungle that just, people that understand what they're looking for would, just see that right away. So it was kind of painstaking to make sure everything matched up. Being my first film, I was a little naive when I went into it. I talked to all these veterans on the phone before I met them, and I said, "Hey, could you just bring photos from Vietnam?" And I figured, I'll have enough to go by. And I'm like, I was mistaken, in the first interview on that, because I just had basically candid photos, really. So the National Archives was a godsend for this film project, and it really helped amplify the story visually. So it was great.
So are you feeling like you're going to make more films?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got a few more in the works that are in the planning stages right now. One of my buddies who's a former Marine that saw the premiere of the film called me out of the blue one day and says, "I've got a perfect topic for you for your next film." I was like, "Oh yeah, what is it?" Because I'm definitely interested in doing more veteran films. And he said, "Do something lighthearted." And because it was an emotional journey for me. It was amazing because I've always had a good relationship with my dad, a close relationship, but through this process and afterwards, our relationship has gotten a lot tighter. And the veterans in the film, I didn't know them before I met them before the interviews. But now we're all on Facebook together, and I get texts and calls from them. And I've been to 4 reunions with them and my dad, and it's extended family.
Paul, speaking of the individuals that are featured in your film, you have quite a few people telling their stories in your film. Did you know what stories you wanted told, or who was going to speak, or were you surprised at what emerged?
As I said, when I first merged out, I didn't know where I was going with any of it. And some people opened up right away. People were talking about all the people they lost to suicide, all the tears they have shed. These are combat veterans. And the thing that was so overwhelming to me was how much vulnerability ties in with courage. I can be completely open with you, and then that allows me to be open. It's so amazing. So no, I didn't really know, but I got involved in one tent, and they're all basically A through Z, and I got involved in hotel tent. And then just the stories just come out, and I work with the people that were running it as well. And I wish real life was more like this. People could just be more honest and more open and helpful, because this event is just phenomenal. It's really a spiritual thing. And one guy in the film says that. He says, like, once you've been to that intersection of life and death, you'll never be the same. And to be around somebody like that, I'm not the same either.
One of the comments made was, there's only one virtue: courage, the courage to love. And there were some other people that were focusing on different aspects, but you just used the term courage, and it stuck with me that that one person who mentioned there's only one virtue: courage. That's pretty startling.
Yeah, it is. It's something you can take away and use every day. And I think that's what I'm trying to, from these people. I met a guy who was had been a millionaire and owned all these racehorses and all this stuff, and his wife died. He went down the drain. He was homeless, and all of that stuff went away. And then when he came back, he was all about everybody else. So it wasn't about, oh, look at my new car and this and that. He'd lost the core of his life, and he got it back by giving to others. It was that's miraculous.
So we see some transformation of people in the course of this weekend. And enthusiastic celebrations near the end and everybody singing together and so on. Do you have a sense of what the follow-up is and what whether it's a success rate or the chances of people able to follow through after a weekend like that?
I think it basically is age related now. I mean, people who have recently come out of some of these circumstances that are younger, they find employment, they get their houses and their lives back, you know, they get attached to their children, and more that group of people who are 50 and over who hit the streets, they kind of get stuck there. It's really, really tough. It's really tough to see because they just can't make it over the hump. And I know Dr. John Natchison and Marilyn and some of the other people that are working at VVSD are really trying to concentrate on that. And especially now in the period of COVID, oh my God, to be stuck on the street at this time. And they're really important people. And from just the public health, I mean, they could be spreaders. And here are these people that need to be loved and protected and cared for. And I don't know. I haven't been down there. They canceled it this year. I mean, all the spirit and the will is there, but what a challenge. This is just a real challenge.
Charles, in the stories that you've told, there's a section in which you identify key people, and then you mentioned earlier a couple of them, the Colby connection and a few others that connected from OSS days to more current times. Do you have a sense that people who were involved in these probably the most difficult of circumstances have had a particularly difficult time or a particularly successful life afterwards?
I don't know that I could generalize about that. I think there are probably people that fall into both categories. I know, speaking for my father, I'd say he probably fell in both camps. You know, he was 19 years old behind enemy lines in China. I think it was, for many people, including my father, you know, the formative experience of their life. I don't think they ever matched that level of excitement or intrigue ever again. And I'm sure a lot of them suffered from, you know, back in the day, you know, back in World War II, there was no concept of post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, they called it battle fatigue. But do I think a lot of OSS veterans who, well, as General Donovan said, performed some of the bravest acts of the war and volunteered to go behind enemy lines, did they suffer as a result of it? There's no doubt they did. I mean, they're human beings who could survive something like that and not be affected by it. I mean, when my dad was behind enemy lines, you know, the Japanese had a price on his head. He wrote a wonderful memoir. It's called Journey to Peking, A Secret Agent in Wartime China. It was published by the Naval Institute Press. And in it, he tells a story about another naval intelligence person that he meets when he's in China. He later discovers that he was captured by the Japanese and was forced to dig his own grave. So I think when you're living under that kind of unimaginable stress, yeah, it had to affect all of them, I think, and in many different ways, and their families, right? So.
And that's the thing that struck me about, you know, thinking about Sean's movie, where these survivors of this battle all shared essentially the same experience, and there was a lot of talk about taking care of each other and about the team and so on, versus the OSS thing where you're often a one-man show or nearly so.
Correct.
And I would think that that would be a considerably different set of stressors.
Well, absolutely. You're by yourself. Who do you trust? You know, you're constantly, you know, concerned for your safety, and which makes what they did, in my mind, even more remarkable, that they were able to deal with that level of stress and still function. But, you know, the OSS, they were very scientific about selecting people. They put the selection necessity methods that the OSS invented and implemented are still used today by special forces. They need to find people who could do this, you know, which wasn't an easy thing to do. And how do you do that? So they had teams of psychologists and psychiatrists analyzing these people to make sure that they could withstand those stresses. Not all of them did, but they applied a very scientific method to the whole process of selecting, assessing, and training people. You know.
One of the films that's on our film festival veterans track is called My War. And if you haven't seen it, I hope you do. It's very short, 3.5 minutes. And it's of a woman shopping, and there are triggers, PTS triggers happening to her as she's shopping. And it connects, I think, maybe the common thread of the stories we have here of war experiences that change people's lives dramatically, whether it's in terms of PTS or realizations about self or setting of priorities. And so I'm thinking that maybe is there something in terms of what you've done, and we'll start with you, Sean, that is a message to veterans, maybe that comes out of your experience in creating that film?
Yeah, sure. And that's one of the things that, growing up in a military family, I always had a respect for the armed forces, the military, for veterans. And, I understood to my knowledge what PTSD was. But I think through the course of this journey, making this film, I now have much more empathy towards veterans and people that are suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's a lot of them. I couldn't imagine, well, I can't imagine, period, but I would imagine that people, combat vets, all have it in some way. It's life-changing. And, one of the things that I wanted to do with this film as it was coming together, as listening to these stories, was to share how this group of men have come together and continue to come together. Either whether calling on the phone or going to reunions, it's part of the healing even after 50 years later. It's interesting. Yesterday we had a call with some of the veterans in the film and with the current members of A Company, 2nd Battalion, 503rd of the 173rd that's stationed in Italy. So we had a Zoom call with them, and that was fantastic. And some of the veterans in this film had never used Zoom. So we had a few days, and it was hard being on the phone trying to walk them through technical problems and things like that. But once we did a few practice runs, you could tell just how great it was for them all to get together, and they were just laughing and cutting up and picking on each other, and it was just wonderful. So I'm sure they're going to be taking Zoom now and use it much more to stay, because they're all in different parts of the country. But really, back to your question, it's that having each other's backs, understanding what you've been through, bonding and sharing just even stories with, or sharing a beer, a laugh. It's healing.
Paul, do you have a message for veterans who may be watching this that perhaps you've learned from making that film?
Yeah, I would say, piggybacking on what Sean just said, was like that healing happens, but it's continuous. And I think people who've been in the military have an experience like you don't get in regular life. And after that, it could really be a letdown. So I think staying in touch with others, communicating, not holding it in. I mean, that's a big thing. I mean, a lot of the people that I talked to, they said, well, I'm a Marine. I don't have feelings. It's like, yeah, you do. And, once they let that out, their mission became so much bigger than their rank, and their kind of soul expanded into that. So I think it's really important to be able to share that and have community, especially in a time like this. And I think Zoom is a wonderful thing, because we could live through isolation, but if we don't thrive, it's not the same. You know what I mean? Because we're really meant to work, and especially if you're in the military, you're meant to work as a unit. So I think that openness is important, and healing is a ongoing process, and it's so important to stay in touch with the people that we've been through some of these circumstances with.
Charles, you described a story of individuals who, as you say, changed the world by changing the outcome of the war.
Yep.
In creating this, is that, of course, you've lived with a father who who was one of them.
Sure.
Any messages for veterans that come from what you've
Well,
done?
to me, you think of World War II, you think of thousands of troops and airplanes and tanks and ships. To me, what I love about telling these stories is it focuses on individuals and what an individual, was able to accomplish. I mentioned earlier that, John Ford commanded the Field Photographic Branch. Peter Ortiz started a number of his films after the war, including Rio Grande with John Wayne. He also served in the OSS. He was a Marine colonel. He's the most highly decorated member of the OSS. He received 2 Navy Crosses, did remarkable things. One of the great stories about him is that he was behind enemy lines in France in a bar, and there were some German officers saying unkind things about President Roosevelt and the Marine Corps. So he went back to his house. He put on his Marine Corps uniform. He came back in with a cape. He took the cape off. He's pointing 245s at the Germans, and he made them offer toast to President Roosevelt and to the Marine Corps. It's just an incredible story. So those were the kind of people that were in the OSS, somebody who would think of doing that and getting away with it. Alberto Marin, I was watching Casablanca, one of all our favorite movies. I don't know if you've seen the scene. There's a scene in the bar where a French officer gets into a fight with a German officer and Rick breaks him up. Well, that French officer was played by Alberto Marin, who was in the OSS. He also starred in a number of John Ford films after the war. I think I read he spoke 7 languages. He was a real genius. But I was thinking, the films you see behind me are the 3 films that we've produced so far. We've got 2 more in the works, and one of the things I'm proud of is that I hope that John Ford and the members of the Hollywood community who served in the OSS, would be proud of our cinematic efforts, kind of keeping their cinematic tradition alive, if you will, through these documentaries.
So what is the future, just to close this out, Charles, what is the future of your movie making prospects and of the organization that you are directing? So
we have 2 documentaries in the works. We're doing we actually had we had a Donovan Award dinner planned for this fall, which unfortunately we couldn't hold, but the films we made last year got such an enthusiastic response. And the year before, we made one, you'll see it behind me too, that shows 2 women on the screen. This is about the women of the OSS. And so we have 2 in production, one about the OSS in its entirety, not just D-Day. And then we have another film actually that I'm looking forward to showing at the Coronado Film Festival about the OSS Field Photographic Branch and the connections between the OSS and Hollywood, because I think that's another part of this history that no one really knows anything about, just how closely connected the film industry and the OSS were. And that's how, farsighted General Donovan was, that even thought to do this in World War II. I'll tell you an amazing thing. The OSS Field Photographic Branch, they had a guy literally on the beach filming the invasion. They put him in the night before, which is insane, but they did it. There's a great story. I just happened to post this the other day because I think it was the anniversary of the day on which General Donovan received his 2nd star. OSS was an unusual organization. It was a civilian organization, although it reported to the Joint Chiefs. It recruited its personnel from every branch of the military and the civilian population. McGeorge Bundy, who served as President Kennedy and President Johnson's national security advisor, said it was a fascinating organization, half cops and robbers and half faculty meeting. So the day after Donovan gets his 2nd star, he comes into the morning staff meeting, which is pretty casual, but he's dressed up in his uniform, which I guess he didn't do very often. And when nobody kind of saluted him or, congratulated him on getting his 2nd star, I guess he was a little perturbed. And John Ford came in late and evidently inebriated. And General Donovan said, Commander, if you can see straight, we can get the meeting started. And Ford responded, General, I can see one thing. You've got the Medal of Honor on the wrong place on your uniform. But if you look at who was in the OSS, I mean, truly just the greatest people you can imagine, from Julia Child, the French chef, to Ralph Bunche, who was the first person of color to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, to Jack Kilby, who invented the integrated circuit and received the Nobel Prize, to Aaron Bank, the founder of Special Forces, Garson Kanin, I mentioned earlier, the great screenwriter. Marlene Dietrich worked with the OSS. I mean, it was truly just an incredibly talented group of people. And I think that's another important lesson to be drawn from it, because he recruited the greatest academics in the country to work for the OSS for its research and analysis branch. They called themselves the Chairborne Division. So it's a fascinating organization, and I encourage everybody to watch the films and read about it too. There are tons of books about the OSS and General Donovan.
Sean, you mentioned that you're working on some other films. So this one sparked your new career, or does this one also have a future?
Well, I think that, right now I'm looking for a home for this film, but the things I have in progress are really at this stage more ideas than anything else. But, I definitely have the bug. It's just been an incredibly rewarding experience for me. I loved it. Like I said, I've got some good filmmaker friends, and we're already planning on a couple different types of projects. We'll see what happens with that. But, we're not, a lot of people, because of the pandemic, are not out there in production, or if they are, it's limited. So it's a great time to plan and think about the next move.
Well, it was delightful watching your film, delightful and emotional, and but a really well told story. And Paul, you have goals of using your film to expand the mission to other locations?
Yes. My plan is this. I've got a hybrid distribution platform. But first of all, I'm going to take this content and bring it into colleges and universities for counselors, because the military component of this, I mean, if you don't know who you're talking to, you could completely miss the cues. So I want to be able to help educate those that are, going to be psychologists and counselors, to know more about this specific demographic of people and what they've been through, because oftentimes embedded in that, there's the trauma and there's all these other things. So I want to make them better counselors. So the service people that are coming in for treatment, those that come forward, will get better services. But I'm also going to do a hybrid distribution launch in which I work with different entities, so we can spread it out all over the United States and have specific events around this. So the public is sensitized to the fact that when we see these people that are in need, to understand what got them there, and give them the lifeline they need to be able to keep moving on with their lives, and be, sensitive to the fact that, especially ones that are homeless, this was not their first choice. This was like the last choice. They just knew survival skills given to them by the military. Now, how can we get them out of the survival mode in their brain and help them have the life they were meant to have? So anyway, I'm going to probably the beginning of the year launch this, so I can make that outreach effort. And there's actually like over 300 stand downs in the United States. Obviously not like the one in San Diego, but the need is pretty much everywhere. And I'm gonna see if I can address that. And then as well, I'll work with the colleges and universities and training centers where this might be useful.
Hey, Mike, I realized I didn't answer the second part of your question about the future of our organization.
Yes.
And I just want to step away and share something with you. Can you see the virtual background behind me?
Yeah, I had a feeling that's what that was about.
So what you're looking at is an aerial rendering of the National Museum of Intelligence and Special Operations that the OSS Society is planning to build in Northern Virginia. The spearhead was the symbol used by the OSS.
It's used today by the intelligence and special operations community to honor its OSS roots. And that's what you're going to see when you fly into Dulles Airport lit up at night, is that beautiful building. And interestingly enough, speaking of geniuses, one of the Dulles Airport was designed by the great architect, Eero Saarinen, who served in the OSS, which is unbelievable. And the museum is going to honor Americans who served at the tip of the spear as our nation's first line of defense, and educate the American public about the importance of strategic intelligence and special operations to the preservation of freedom. And the design of that building, I love it because it really embodies kind of the history and the mission and the spirit of these two communities, and it links them together. Part of the story we want to tell, there was another wonderful quote from, I'm always collecting quotes by and about Donovan and the OSS, but a staffer for the OSS said that General Donovan's imagination was so powerful, he could see an acorn and envision an oak tree. Well, in that metaphor, right, the OSS is the acorn, the oak tree is everything that it's become. Our intelligence community, our special operations community, State Department, INR. So that's part of the story we want to tell, is how it started out together under the OSS. It grew apart after the war. CIA was created in 1947, Special Forces in 52, and how it's grown back together since 9/11. And is really working, I think, today in the way that General Donovan envisioned it should work. So that's kind of a fascinating piece of history too.
Yeah, thank you for filling in the blanks on that. I'm looking forward to coming and visiting it. That museum.
Well, here, I got to show you one other thing. Hold on. So at our dinner every year that we hold at the Ritz-Carlton in Washington, we commemorate a great episode that occurred when, hold on, I'm sorry. There you go. So in 1944, when Paris was liberated, Ernest Hemingway, who'd been working with the OSS and whose son was in the OSS and helped create special forces after the war, and Colonel David Bruce, who was chief of OSS operations in Europe, liberated the bar at the Hotel Ritz in Paris. That was their kind of ritual of liberation. And the manager came out, the Nazis had left, and Hemingway ordered 50 martinis for them. So at our dinner every year in Washington, we kind of recreate this ceremonial liberation. We've actually built a replica of the bar from the Hotel Ritz in Paris, which is magnificent. It's up on our stage. It's actually nicer than the real one, I'll be honest with you. One year we flew over their head bartender to make our martinis. So when I'm going to show this to you. I'll just step away again. We're building within our museum a bar inspired by the Bar Hemingway at the Hotel Ritz in Paris. If you can see that.
I'm looking forward to the martini, Charles.
Which is why I tell everybody what we're really building is
A martini bar with a museum attached to it. There's some truth in that. So, yeah.
This has been a delightful session for me, and I want to say that as inspirational as your films were and how well they tell their story, you individuals are inspirational, and I've really appreciated the opportunity to get to meet you. Thank you so much for participating in our Veterans Day honor, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Mike, and thanks for your service.